Spring rains soaked the Tennessee countryside, turning roads into rivers of mud as armies moved toward each other. Near a quiet wooden church called Shiloh, Union tents spread across fields that still smelled of fresh grass. Soldiers laughed, cooked, and played cards, believing the enemy was miles away. They had no idea death was already marching toward them. Thomas Avery sat near a campfire, cleaning his rifle with slow, careful hands. The memory of Bull Run still haunted him, replaying in sharp flashes every time he closed his eyes. He had learned one brutal lesson: war was not glory, it was chaos. And chaos was coming again. Before dawn on April 6, 1862, the forest came alive with sound. Birds exploded from the trees as Confederate troops surged forward through the mist. Then came the gunfire, sudden, violent, and everywhere. The Union camp woke in terror. Thomas was thrown from his blanket as bullets ripped through tents. Men screamed, scrambling for weapons as officers shouted conflicting orders. Smoke rolled between the trees, turning friend and enemy into shadows. The battle had begun without warning. On the Confederate side, Caleb tightened his grip on his rifle as he charged through the undergrowth. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it over the gunfire. Officers urged the men forward, promising a swift victory. Caleb pushed on, afraid to stop, afraid to think. The fighting spread like wildfire through the woods. Lines dissolved as soldiers fired at muzzle flashes and movement. The ground became slick with mud and blood, bodies falling where they stood. Shiloh Church echoed with the roar of cannons. Thomas took cover behind a fallen tree, firing blindly into the smoke. A man beside him was hit and dropped without a sound. There was no time to help, no time to mourn. Survival was the only thought that mattered. By mid-morning, Union forces were being driven back toward the Tennessee River. Camps were overrun, supplies captured, flags trampled into the mud. Confederate cheers rang out, but they were drowned by the screams of the wounded. Victory already carried a terrible cost. Caleb followed his unit into a place soldiers would soon call the Hornet's Nest. Union troops held the line fiercely. Firing so fast the air seemed to buzz like angry insects. Men fell by the dozens on both sides.
Ow.
The ground shook as artillery pounded the position relentlessly. Thomas was pulled into the Hornet's Nest without realizing where he was. The noise was deafening, bullets snapping past like whips. He fired until his rifle burned his hands. Round him, men fought with desperate fury, knowing retreat meant death. Hour after hour, the fighting refused to stop. Smoke darkened the sky until the sun vanished completely. Orders were lost, units shattered, time forgotten. Shiloh became a world of fire and confusion. As evening approached, Confederate momentum slowed. Union resistance stiffened just enough to prevent total collapse. Caleb noticed the men around him growing exhausted, faces gray with shock. The promised swift victory was slipping away. When night finally fell, the battlefield grew eerily quiet. Fires burned across the fields, illuminating thousands of wounded crying for help. Rain began to fall, mixing with blood and soaking the broken ground. Soldiers lay awake, listening to the suffering around them. Thomas sat against a tree, shaking uncontrollably. He realized he had survived another day, but survival no longer felt like relief. Every sound made him flinch. War was carving pieces out of his soul. Across the lines, Caleb wrapped his coat tighter and stared into the darkness. He wondered how many men would never see morning. He whispered a prayer for himself and for Thomas. Sleep never came. At dawn, fresh Union troops crossed the river, their arrival changing everything. Drums beat, cannons roared, and blue lines surged forward with renewed strength. The battle exploded back to life with even greater violence. Shiloh was not finished. Thomas joined the advance, legs heavy but determined. He stepped past bodies frozen in unnatural poses, eyes staring at nothing. The smell of death hung thick in the air. This was the true face of war. Caleb fought desperately as Union pressure increased. The Confederate line bent, then slowly began to break. Officers shouted for order, but exhaustion ruled the men. Step by step, they were forced back. By afternoon, it was clear the battle had turned. Confederate forces withdrew from the field, leaving behind thousands of dead and wounded. The forest fell silent once more. Shiloh was over. The cost was unimaginable. More than 20,000 men lay dead, wounded or missing. America had never seen slaughter on such a scale. Any illusion of a short war died at Shiloh. Thomas stood among the ruins, staring at the field in numb disbelief. He had survived again, but the boy who marched to war was gone. Something harder, quieter had taken his place. He knew there was no turning back. Miles away, Caleb marched with the retreating army, shoulders slumped. Victory and defeat felt meaningless now. The war had revealed its true hunger for lives, for families, for the future, and it was far from satisfied. In Washington, Lincoln read casualty lists that seemed endless. His face grew heavier with each page. Shiloh had proven the war would be long and merciless. The nation was bleeding. In Charleston, Eliza read reports of Shiloh by candlelight. The numbers made her hands tremble. This was no distant conflict anymore. It was a slaughter consuming everything. She felt the war pulling her closer than ever. Night fell again, over America, heavier than before. Soldiers on both sides stared into darkness, knowing peace was nowhere in sight. Shiloh had unleashed something unstoppable. The march toward blood would continue.